Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome to another episode of Quranic Language Made Easy. My name is Samina, and today we are going to discuss about the most weighted topic, which many of you have requested, that is the weak verbs. So I was actually trying to figure out as how I can make this topic as simple as possible. Alhamdulillah, with Allah's help, I came up with few flowcharts. So let's dive into the ocean of the weak verbs. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا من فضلك علما إنك على كل شيء قدير رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي رب زدني علما. In this video we are going to discuss about different types of verbs in detail, about the regular and irregular verbs, weak verbs, that is al-mu'tal, and its different types in details with different examples. And this video is the overview about the weak verbs, not in details. And we are going to learn about the weak letters and their position in the verb and the overview of the weak verbs. So let's begin. Al-af'al, the plural of fi'l, this is divided into two types. The first one is al-af'al as-sahiha, the sound verbs, and the al-af'al al-mu'tal, the weak verbs. Let us learn what exactly al-af'al as-sahiha are. There are two main types of verbs in Arabic. The first one is al-af'al as-sahiha, the sound verbs. These are the sound verbs which don't have any weak letters in them. What is the weak letter? There are three weak letters or the vowels in Arabic. They are alif, waw, and ya. Whenever these weak letters occur in a verb, that verb is considered as a weak verb. The sound or the sahih verbs are the verbs that don't have these weak letters alif, waw, or ya in them as one of the root letters. Sound or the salim verbs is one which does not have a hamza or an alif or a waw or a ya as one of the radicals, and its second and third radicals are not identical or of the same kind. Then this is called as sound verb or salim verb or al-af'al as-sahiha. They're further divided into two types: the regular sound verb and the irregular sound verbs. Let's learn what the regular sound verb is. The regular sound verbs are the verbs, just now I said, which do not have the weak letters alif, waw, or ya as one of the root radicals, and its second and third radicals are not identical, and this is called as sound verbs or the regular sound verbs or the salim verbs or the al-af'al as-sahiha. And the examples are fa'ala yaf'alu, daraba yadribu, sami'a yasma'u, qatala yaqtulu. Right? These are the verbs which don't have a weak letters in them. And most of the Arabic verbs belong to this category. The next type is irregular sound verbs. The irregular sound verbs are further divided into two types. The first is Mahmuz and the second is Muda'af. Let's learn what exactly Mahmuz is. Mahmuz, as the root word, the root letters for this word are ha, mim, za, which means hamza. These are called as hamzated verbs, where a hamza is one of the root letter. For example, akala yakulu, which means to eat. And there are three types of mahmuz verb. And do you remember fa'ala? The verb has three radicals. The fa kalima or the fa radical, the first one, the second radical is the ain radical, and the third radical is the lam radical. So based on that, the mahmuz is divided into three types. The first type is mahmuz al-fa, which means the hamza occurs in the fa radical, akhadha. Mahmuz al-ain, where the hamza occurs in the second radical, that is the ain radical, sa'ala, which means to ask. Mahmuz al-lam, where the hamza occurs in the lam radical or the third radical, qara'a, which means to read. The second type is al-muda'af. The second type of irregular sound verb is muda'af. Muda'af means geminate or doubled verbs. where the second and the third radicals of the root are the same. For example, madda yamuddu or habba yahibbu. Notice that the root word for madda are mim, dal and dal. And note that dal and dal, the second and the third radical are the same. That's why they multiply and they put a shadda on the dal, on one dal, and it becomes madda and habba. So these were the two types of sound verbs, the regular sound verbs, the normal ones, and the irregular sound verbs. Again, they are divided into two types, Mahmuz and Muda'af. Mahmuz is again divided into Mahmuz al-fa, al-ain, and al-lam. Now, the third type is al-af'al al-mu'tal, the weak verbs. The weak verbs or unsound verbs are the verbs which have a weak letter in them. What are the weak letters? Alif, waw, and ya, right? Most Arabic verbs have only 3 letters most of the time, which are called as radicals. The first radical is fa, the second radical is ain, the third radical is lam. These names are taken from the verb fa'ala, which is used as a reference pattern for all the verbs. The weak verb al-mu'tal, if any of the 3 radicals is either an alif or a waw or a ya, then the verb is called the mu'tal or the weak verb or the sick verb or the unsound verb. And the letters alif, waw or ya are called as weak letters. In Arabic, they're called as huruf illah or huruf illat. For example, the example of weak verbs are yasara, to ease, wasala, to arrive, radiya, to be pleased, da'a, to call or invite, waqa is to save. And notice you have weak letters in them. The fi'l al-mu'tal or the weak verbs are again divided into 4 types. First type is Mithal. Second type is Ajwaf. Third type is Naqis. Fourth type is Lafif. For now, don't worry about Lafif. Just pay attention to Mithal, Ajwaf and Naqis. And there's a reason why I have divided Mithal, Ajwaf and Naqis in this order, in this particular order. And also there's a cool way to remember the different types of weak verbs. If someone asks you what are the different types of al-af'al al-mu'tal, the weak verbs, then you should be able to say mithal, ajwaf and naqis. How? Look at the first word. Mithal is M, ajwaf is A and naqis is N. So you can remember it as man, M-A-N, man. So the different types of weak verbs are man. So M stands for mithal, A stands for Ajwaf and N stands for Naqis. So the 3 different classes of weak verbs are Al-Fi'l Al-Mithal, which means the assimilated verbs, Al-Fi'l Al-Ajwaf, hollow verbs, Al-Fi'l Al-Naqis, the defective verbs. And there's a reason for placing Mithal first, Ajwaf second and Naqis third, because Mithal is an irregularity, the weak verb where the weak letter occurs in the first letter, the fa radical. Ajwaf is where the weak letter occurs in the ain radical, the second radical. And naqis is a weak verb in which the weak letter occurs in the lam radical, the third radical. That's the reason mithal, ajwaf and naqis are placed. Let's learn the weak verbs in details about mithal, ajwaf and naqis. Al-fi'l al-mithal or the assimilated verbs. Mithal is an irregularity when the first letter is a weak letter, a vowel. Verbs where the first radical is a long vowel, usually a vowel. For example, wa'ada ya'idu. This you're going to learn completely in lesson number 23 of Unit 2, inshallah. Mithal is a verb in which the first letter is a weak letter. And mithal is again divided into 2 types, mithal wawi and mithal yai. Mithal wawi is when the first letter is a waw, like wa'ada ya'idu. Mithal yai is when the first root letter is a ya, ya'isa yai'asu. This Mithal Ya'i is very rare in the Quran. Most of the time Mithal Wawi occurs a lot of time in the Quran. And another kind is actually that starts with a Ya. Ya Isa, Yai Asu. And Mithal verb always starts with either a Waw or a Ya. Note that the weak verbs beginning with waw are just like regular verbs regarding the Madi conjugations. Remember the Madi, fa'ala, fa'ala, fa'alu, fa'alat, fa'alata, fa'alna, and so on. Same way, the wa'ada, the weak verbs begin with a waw, they are also the same. Wa'ada, wa'ada, wa'adu. Okay, let's move to the second type, which is al-fi'l al-ajwaf, the hollow verbs. An ajwaf or the hollow verb is that whose second or the middle letter, the ayn radical, is a weak letter. Most ajwaf verbs have an alif as its second or middle letter. The origin of the middle letter alif is mostly a waw or a ya that is turned into an alif. Pay attention to that note. Ajwaf is divided into three types. Ajwaf wawi, ajwaf yai, and ajwaf with alif. Ajwaf wawi is one when the verbs where the second radical is a waw. For example, we have qala yaqulu. And notice that qala yaqulu in the word qala madi, the root letter might seem to be qaf, alif, and lam. But in reality, it's not the truth. In reality, the root letters are qaf, waw, and lam. And how do you know that it's a waw and not an alif? Look at the mudare. It is yaqulu. The waw comes back. So the root letter are qaf, waw, lam. Qala yaqulu. The second type is ajwaf yai. The root letters, the example for ajwaf yai is zada yazidu. Zada again looks like qala, right? And again you might think the root letters are za and alif and dal. But in reality, what are the root letters? It's not za, waw, dal. It's za, ya, and dal. Why? Look at that mudare. It's yazidu. The ya comes back. So that's why you should remember that zada, the root letters are za, ya, and dal. So whenever you have an alif, you should remember that it's either a waw or a ya most of the time. That's what this note says. Most ajwaf verbs have an alif as its second or middle letter, like qala, zada. The origin of the middle letter is mostly a waw in case of qala, yaqulu, or a ya in case of zada, yazidu, that is turned into an alif, qala and zada. The third type is ajwaf with alif. For example, khafa, yakhafu. In this case, we have khafa. The root letters are kha, alif, and fa. Right? It's not a waw or a ya because in the mudari it is yakhafu. There's an alif. There are few verbs in which the waw or ya are not turned into an alif. So we have khafa and yakhafu. The three types of ajwaf are ajwaf wawi, ajwaf yai, and ajwaf with alif. In the madi, the waw or ya is replaced by an alif. The third type is al-fi'l al-naqis, which means defective verbs. The third type of the weak verbs is the defective or the naqis verb. The naqis or defective verb is one whose third or the last letter, the lam radical, is a weak letter. Naqis verbs have a ya or a waw as its last letter. The final alif is often turned into a waw or a ya. Verbs where the final root radical is either a waw or ya is a naqis. There are four types of defective verbs, al-fi'l al-naqis. The first is naqis wawi, second is naqis yai, third is naqis with sa'a, yasa'a, naqis with laqiya, yalqa. The first type is verbs with a waw as the last root letter. For example, we have da'a, yada'u. Again, if you look at da'a, you might think the root letters are dal, ain, and alif. But in reality, what is the root letter? You must be knowing by now. Because yada'u has a waw, so the root letters are dal, ain, and waw. So the verbs with waw as the last root letter is the first type, which the examples are da'a, yada'u. And this you'll learn in detail in lesson number 24 of unit 2. The meaning is to call. The second type is naqis yai, where The first type was Naqis wawi, da'a, yada'u. The root letters are da, ain, and waw. Second type is Naqis ya'i, where ya is the one of the root letter and which is at the end. Hada, yahdi. So here the verbs with a ya as the last root letter. Hada, yahdi, which means to guide. This you'll learn in detail in lesson number 25 of unit 2. Again, hada, the root letters are ha, da, and ya. Why? Look at the mudare, it is yahdi. The third type is verbs with a ya as the last root letter. For example, sa'a, yas'a. This you'll learn in detail in lesson 26, which means to strive after. Notice that hada, the mudare is yahdi. And for sa'a, the mudare is yas'a. Different mudare. And verbs, the fourth type is verbs with a ya as the last root letter. For example, laqiya, yalqa. This you'll learn in detail in lesson 27. Laqiya is the madi and yalqa is the mudare, which is similar to yas'a. So these were four types of naqis: naqis wawi, da'a, yad'u, naqis ya'i, hada, yahdi, naqis sa'a, yas'a, naqis with laqiya, yalqa. So these were the different types of mithal, ajwaf, and naqis. Mithal. So these different types of mithal, ajwaf, and naqis, like mithal wawi, and ajwaf ya'i, and ajwaf with alif, naqis wawi, naqis ya'i, naqis with sa'a, yas'a, naqis with laqiya, yalqa, are going to be explained in detail in different lesson in the book, inshallah. You're going to learn in the future lessons. Next is the fourth type of weak verb, which is lafif. Lafif means a verb which has two weak letters in its root form. When there are two letters out of three that are vowels, the irregularity is called as lafif. The letters that make a verb sick or weak are what? They are alif, waw, and ya. And lafif means two letters out of three are weak. And this irregularity is crazy. Why? Because it makes things extra hard. Because when the vowel is at the beginning, this is called as mithal. And the vowel which is at the end is called as naqis. Whereas a lafif is a word which includes both mithal and naqis. That's when the things get a little hard. Don't worry, you'll get it, inshallah. There are two types of lafif. The first is lafif mafruq. The second type is lafif maqroon. Lafif mafruq is when the first and the third root letters are the weak letters. For example, waqa, yaqi. Notice that the first fa radical is a weak letter waw and the lam radical, third radical is a ya, waqa, and yaqi, which means to protect. The second type is lafif maqroon, where the second and the third radicals of a verb are the weak letters. For example, kawa yakwi, which means to smooth out. Notice that the second or the ain radical is a waw, a weak letter, and the lam radical or the third root letter is a ya. So we have two weak letters are the weak letters in lafif maqroon, and in lafif mafruq, first and third root letter are the weak letter. So this video was about only the overview of the weak verbs. Please don't get overwhelmed with the amount of explanation over here, as inshallah I'm going to explain each topic separately in a separate video with Madi chart, Mudare, Amar, and passives with different Qur'anic examples, inshallah. So stay tuned and remember in du'as that Allah makes it easy for me, inshallah. And in the next video, I'll be explaining about each of those in detail, inshallah. And if you have any questions or doubts, you can contact me on qlme2017 at gmail.com. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.